Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to discuss a hot topic that seems to surround owners of many a track car, and in this case owners of 335i's. So in this video we are going to talk about turbos. Okay, so the first question you really want to be asking yourself when you're looking at upgrading the turbos is, what is my goal? What am I going to use the car for? What am I trying to achieve? The question alone should usually guide roughly where you want to go with it, but for me these can fall into three broad categories. So number one, a fun daily driver. You just want to use a car on the street, have a few quick blasts, and generally just have a good time with it, have a bit of fun with it. Normally you want to keep that nice and reliable too. Number two, which is where I come in, track car. I put stroke drift. Obviously I don't do drifting personally, I like go around the corners quickly. So that's number two, and number three is your out and out drag car, you know, high power queen, and that's where you're going with that. So let's look at each of those individually. So number one was our fun daily driver. So here you really want a lot of low down response. You want something that if you were to mash the pedal at almost any RPM, the car is just going to pick up and go. So with that in mind, probably contrary to what we're hoping to see here, you're arguably better off sticking with your OEM turbos. The OEM turbos respond like that. They pick up almost instantly. It's like driving a normally aspirated car on steroids. Now I've been running my car with the MHD 2+ map, and it's great fun on the road. Pickups excellent. The only negative is that the power does drop off a little bit quickly towards the top of the rev range. And that's simply just because at high RPM the turbos couldn't keep up. However, at the time I did also only have the stock inlets and outlets. So if you do change those or decide to change those, keeping your stock turbos, that will, you know, open it up a little bit more, but still don't expect the OEM turbos to keep going to the red line, because they won't. The other alternative to that is to have a smaller frame single turbo, such as a GTX30, Precision 5858, or an EFR 7670, something around that size, that is good for peak about 600 horsepower, but you know that depends on a million and one factors. What that's going to give you though is a lot of low down pickup, because at the end of the day you've got a high compression 3-litre engine here, and that is going to spool a turbo that size very quickly. Depending on the rear exhaust housing that you pick, and again to suit the engine you're going to want quite a large one, it will carry on holding that power through to the rev range, because at the end of the day these engines don't have a high red line. We're only 7,000, so it will carry on going. But the only limitation here, of course, and this is why I haven't gone down this route, is simply that the right hand drive market doesn't really exist. So this is kind of only really applicable currently anyway to the left-hand drive market. Reason for that, mainly the steering column's in the way on my car, and it makes it an absolute sod to make a manifold and get a turbo in there with everything else that goes with it. It's just there's not a great deal available on the market right now to do that, so that might be cost prohibitive. However, if it was done right, it would be great fun. So literally the limit here is not many kits exist. It's still relatively expensive. There's a bit more custom work that goes into it. So it's just all things to consider when you're trying to just build a fun daily. So for my recommendation for that, MHD 2+, stock turbos, inlets, outlets, and that will give you a nice reliable 450 horsepower, which is more than enough in general on the road. So secondly, the track car. So this is the area which I'm most interested in. This is the thing that I like to do. And this is what I'm going to be using my car for. So ideally here you want to, it's less important to have the power down the lower end of the rev range. You want power up the high end of the rev range, because that's where the engine is going to spend most of its time. That said, I did enjoy using the stock turbos on track. The response was brilliant, but as I say, you end up just short shifting because the power drops off by 6,000 RPM. The power is kind of going away a little bit, and you could feel that. It was of no benefit being up there. A single turbo setup would work pretty well here, but again the same issues you're going to have, especially for me on a right hand drive car, the options are very, very limited. But if you were to use a single turbo, then something like GTX35, that kind of size turbo, would work pretty well here. It gives plenty of scope for high-end power. It's not going to drop off. That would be, for me, either that or a Precision, I think it's a 62, 66, something along those lines. They all work well anyway. Typically most people in this sort of bracket are going to look at the common eBay twins, so the TD04 17t and 19t. So these are the ones that you can find on eBay for, or Alibaba or any of those other places, for sort of less than $1,000, less than £1,000. And they're sold as effectively a bolt-on upgrade. So you do obviously need a custom tune to dial them in. That goes without saying. To get the best out of anything, custom tuning is the way to go. And in order to make them work best, you are going to have to upgrade your inlets, your outlets, your intercooler, everything supporting around it is going to need to be done. You'd also be wise to upgrade your PCV valve, because the stock plastic one is likely to be well past its best by now, so if you haven't already done that, do that. These can sing if you include, methanol mix or ethanol mix rather, and all of those funky fuels. That just obviously helps the engine stay nice and cool. Add more of that, you will get more power, you can add more timing, it's all good. What this will do is effectively make a very, very quick car in a straight line. The 17Ts are good for 550 plus, the 19T is good for 650 plus. So then for a track car, you then just got to make it go around a corner. So that's a discussion for another day. Now, I managed to pick up a pair of upgraded turbos, which I'll show you and talk you through in a bit. The conclusion here, though, would be for any track car is to try and use the smallest turbo that you can get away with. That gives you enables you to have the peak power up the top. Good response out of the corners. So that said, here probably something along the lines of a 17T turbo sized unit looked like a good bet. As long as you're keeping sensible boost levels, then you can get some pretty respectable power out of them. By respectable boost levels, I sort of mean less than 24, 25 psi, especially if you're on a stock engine. If you're on a built engine, then by all means you can push a little bit more. But anyway, I'll obviously be keeping you posted about how I get on with mine when they're fitted. So finally, drag cars. This isn't a huge area of expertise, I'll admit, although I have done a little bit of front-wheel drive drag racing in my past. So power up top here is always king. Although, so for me, the big single in the correct supporting mods is going to be, just the method of getting it spinning up is going to be king here. Modern GT35s or size turbos can now hit more than 800 horsepower, and with a high comp, again 3-litre engine, that's going to get spinning pretty quick even without assistance. So you can push more if you want. Again, you can try and you can use the 19T turbos. They've still got plenty of grunt. That's still probably going to get you a good 10-second pass. If set up correctly, they're more than capable, especially on funny fuel, of well exceeding 700 horsepower, which is plenty. Obviously, bear in mind this is highly unadvisable on a stock engine. I'm sure plenty of people are going to say, yeah, but I've got over 700 on my stock block, it's fine, it lasts for ages, whatever. Someone will always tell you that. And it might be true, and that's fine, bully for them, wicked. But if it was me, you want to be using good fuels, you want to be giving it every chance to do what it's going to do. So the tune there is vital anyway. Yeah, there's not a great deal more to say about that. I mean, you're going to need all the regular supporting mods, which I'll go through in a second, and just a huge, great turbo. That's how to win races in drag. Happy days. That's it. Oh, and some slicks maybe. Yeah, that'd be a good idea too. So with that said, it's sometimes useful to visualise what I'm trying to talk about here by putting some data side by side. So here goes. Here's a graph of a few turbos plotted against each other to highlight the potential differences in spool and power that you could experience. And I use could because these are generic numbers and shouldn't be taken as gospel, but you can see why certain turbos are suited to particular applications than others. You can see the stock turbos come on strong low down as you'd expect, but die off after about 5,500 RPM. This can be remedied a little by the addition of larger inlets and outlets, but the simple fact is the turbos are too small to hold the power up top. By comparison, the 19T twins come in later, similar to a GT35 single, and hold power to the top of the 7K rev range at higher boost. The 17T sits somewhere in the middle, as you'd expect. So if you're thinking of upgrading your turbos, what should you be looking at to make them work at their best? Here's a brief list of supporting mods that I think will help the engine come alive. So number one, intakes, and by this I mean filters. So if you're staying twins, some BMS, Berger Motorsports filters, or any other decent twin cone filters will do the job nicely. I think as standard they've got like a 2-inch inlet, so as long as you've got a bit of pipe to connect to your either standard intakes or your aftermarket ones, then you're all good there. Number two, intercooler. Vitally important to keep your charge temps down. There are a good few bolt-on coolers on the market, VRSF and such. A 5-inch one, that'll perform well for street use, that'll be good. But if tracking the car, just fit and forget one of the bigger ones. There's 7-inch ones, or as I've done, I've just pieced it together myself using a high-spec intercooler core, and then just had some pipework fabricated for myself. Number three, if you're intending on running the car on track, I'd highly suggest that you upgrade your coolant radiator, oil cooler and transmission coolers. If it's just a road car, you can get away with the stock stuff, but it will get hotter quicker. It's as simple as that. If you're pushing more power, it gets hotter quicker. So if you're on track, you are going to need to keep that cool, otherwise you will be hitting limp mode, and that's not too fun. Number four, most people do this quite early on, but alloy charge pipe. So as standard, these come with a plastic charge pipe. It's quite thin, again a little bit restrictive. Very cheap thing to just change. You don't need anything too fancy. There's plenty on the market for like £60–70 or under $100 or whatever. So just pick one. As long as it's got all the seals you need, it'll do the job, and just helps the engine. Just helps get into the engine. No problem. Number five, fueling. So basically upgrade your low pressure fuel pump. Common upgrades include the Walbro 450, Walbro 535. I personally am going to go for the Walbro 535 because it will just drop into the standard bucket and it'll be good to go, and that will provide enough fuel, certainly for my needs. Obviously if you need more, then there are other options. There's your port injection with standalone injectors, there's meth injection, there's so many different things, but you will need extra hardware and extra complexity. So if you're just looking for what you absolutely need, then you don't need any of that stuff necessarily. Up to you though, entirely up to you, you're cool. So finally, oh no, not finally, sorry, breathing. So inlets and outlets. Now on these, they're massively restrictive. They're tiny. I can't even describe. They're just rubbish. So the intakes, they're very easy to come by. You can either relocate your intakes if you want to, or there's plenty of either 1.75 or 2-inch silicon intake pipes, or even alloy intake pipes that you can get on the market. That will allow your turbos to work much easier. The outlets, again, they look like they've been smashed about with a hammer. They're absolute garbage. If you can get something that's about 1.5-inch internal bore, that is just going to help your turbos breathe that much better. It's just going to help everything. So do that if you can. Decat downpipes seems pretty obvious. They're massively restrictive, and the bonus is you can sell them for a lot of money. People are buying cats all the time. It's great. So normally you'll make money out of it. If you sell your catted pipes and buy them Decat pipes, you'll probably end up with, I don't know, a couple of £100 spare. They obviously help get the exhaust out. Much more free flowing. They're an absolute sod to fit. So if you don't know what you're doing, just beware. but they are massive improvement, and it's one of those improvements you can really feel when you fit them, as well as the noise. It's obviously good as well. And if you haven't already, replace the OEM plastic PCV. I mentioned it before. They do have a tendency to degrade. Not ideal, so just replace it. A Rob Beck one is cheap enough to just do, and also just fit a catch can as well. Plenty of cheap ones on the market. Doesn't have to be expensive, and there's plenty of guides to hooking those up on the internet as well. So those are like the eight things that I think you should probably look at if you're going to upgrade your turbos anyway, if you want to make them work anywhere near their best. So now we've talked about what we actually need to support the turbos. What about the actual turbos themselves? What are the typical differences between those? Now I'm only going to focus on the twin turbo upgrades because that's kind of what we're doing here. I haven't got a big single to hand, and that's what most people are going to be interested in when they're looking at these, because it is the lowest cost option. It's the simplest in terms of parts you need. If you do want to know any actual specs of the bigger singles, then just go to Garrett Precision websites. They'll have reams of information about compressor sizes and all of that. So the stock TD03 turbos, these have a 35.6mm inducer, 46mm exducer compressors, and with a 40mm inducer and 35.1mm exducer exhaust wheel. These are good for up to about 410, 420. I mean, maybe if you really push them, 450, if you're using some funny fuel and can get the timing, at around 19-20 psi boost. If you try and run these above that, you're pretty much just going to start generating heat and no more power, so there's no benefit there at all. As mentioned before, I think personally the MHD 2 Plus map, certainly for an off-the-shelf map, because remember, if you go custom you can obviously get more out of it, but for a generic off-the-shelf map, the 2 Plus map does a really good job with these. And the bonus here is you don't need any fueling mods, so you can literally have the car as is, upload that map, and you're good to go. Obviously Decat downpipes and the other little bits, but those are a really good little option, and they do generate a surprising amount of power given how small they actually are. So yeah, they're not to be overlooked, at all. They surprised many when I was on the track with them in terms of the actual pace of the car, because they pick up so quick, and all you've got to do is sort of short shift at 6, and it just keeps them right on song, and they're actually really good fun to use. So the first of the hybrids that we'll talk about is the TD04 17t, or just commonly known as the 17t. These are one of the two eBay style turbo kits that we'll talk about. And so just to compare with the TD03, just to give you a direct comparison, so we said the TD03 had 35.6mm inducer to the turbo, so the initial blaze of the compressor. The 17T has a 43.4, so it's considerably bigger, and this is obviously what mainly is driving it to be able to produce more power. It also has a slightly bigger exhaust wheel, 47.2 inducer and 41.2 exducer exhaust wheel, and these are good for generally up to around 600 cranks, 650 maybe. A lot of people will vary, and I know on eBay they state 750, but nah, just no, not really going to happen. You're probably going to be looking at running sort of 25 psi to get close to the maximum of what you'll see, but obviously, do you really want to do that on a stock engine? That's entirely up to you. Plain fuel, again, you might want to limit this back to sort of 20-21 psi tops, but that's still going to yield a lot of power, certainly north of 500, which is more than enough for a road car, and in fact most track cars. That's going to make it fly. It's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. The only additional thing over the stock turbos is to upgrade the fueling. You will need a low pressure fuel pump just to give it that extra fuel delivery up to the rail. So the second set of hybrid turbos we're going to talk about is the eBay 19t. It's still a TD04, but it has a slightly bigger compressor wheel in it. This one, so compared again to the TD03, had a 35.6, the 17T had 43.4, This one has 47.2, so it's just under 4mm bigger again, and obviously that's what gives it its higher power potential. Interestingly, it does share the same exhaust wheel to the 17T and housing, purely because the limitations of the housing themselves. Basically, you can't fit anything much bigger in there without having so thin a metal it'll break apart. These should be able to hit 700 crank horsepower, similar boost to 17Ts, with the correct supporting mods. You might well want to look into further fueling options, such as helix overdrive, port injection, but as I said before, it adds an extra level of complexity that you might not want if you're trying to keep things simple. So yes, they've got the power potential up there, but you don't necessarily have to use it. You can leave some on the shelf, which could arguably, mean more reliability. Again, they're going to spool a bit later, goes without saying, but they should arguably hold on a bit later as well. So you'll shift the power band a little bit to the right, spool will be a bit later, but top end will be there. So again, good bet for a track car, or a drag car indeed, or just a fun street thrasher, dyno queen, whatever you want. But yeah, so those are the 19T. I suppose what I have touched on though before is that what should be said is that in truth these hybrids are not the most efficient things in the world. If you took them to most turbo specialists, they'll tell you, the housings are too small, the wheels are too big, yada yada yada. And that's why they have to sort of run quite a high boost to get much out of them. But the reality is with these cars is that space is a limiting factor in the engine bay. In a perfect world, we would have some T28 or T3 based manifolds made with some properly sized turbos in there, like you can do with a Skyline, an RB26 or a 2JZ. But we're just stuck. We're stuck here. There's just no room for that. Again, it's made more tricky with a right-hand drive car rather than a left-hand drive car. It's probably more viable to do that on a left-hand drive car, but we are where we are. We have these, and let's just try and make the best of them. So, that being said, there are loads of variants to these as well. These are just two of the examples. There are plenty of companies out there that make these. So, Rob Beck makes some turbos, Pure makes some turbos. They're all subtle variations in terms of the physical dimensions of these, and as such, they make and can make similar power and whatnot. You can get 11 blade versions which are supposedly give higher peak power due to greater surface area and of the blades and whatnot. There's 6+6, there's 7 blades, but typically the two mentioned here, the ones that you find for less than £1,000, they typically use the 6+6 variant, which it just proves really popular with your budget conscious enthusiasts. My advice here would just be, if you do purchase them, then at least have them balanced and checked over by a specialist. The reliability has been questioned. There's been many failures of these. Is that due? It could be due to 1,000,001 factors, but the engine health itself, ancillary health, failing pumps here and there. The tune, of course. If people just run them on a stock tune, then of course you're going to damage your engine. It's a no-brainer. The PCV system is equally really important on these engines, and also the exhaust, as well as the turbos themselves. If they're out of balance from factory, they're going to die. If the seals are shoddy from the factory, they're going to leak. But it's your call at the end of the day. If you want to take a chance on them, by all means. You may have good luck, you may have bad luck, but I would just stress to try and get them checked. If it was me, that's certainly what I'd be doing. So I myself was going to get a pair of these eBay turbos and do exactly what I've just said. However, I did get a little bit lucky. So I managed to find, buy a pair of blown Vargas 2 Plus turbos, which I've had professionally rebuilt with some quality components here in the UK by Turbo Technics, a turbo specialist. Now, the specs of these differ ever so slightly to either of those. Interestingly, the inducer in these is 47mm, so it's just under a 19T. but the exducer in the compressor is bigger. So I'm just going to have to see how that pans out. It should make for some good high-end power though. I mean, I've got one here. So as you can see, it looks pretty much the same as any other ones you can buy, but obviously it's been rebuilt and cleaned up and basically looks like a brand new turbo now. So I'm very much looking forward to giving those a fit up later today. You know, it should bode well. Obviously my car's being a track car, so pitching it slightly under a 19T should be good. It should give plenty of power potential up the top, should bode well, and I'm really looking forward to getting them fitted. So in conclusion, if you want something to spool quick and have near instant response, probably stay in your stock turbo and just max them out by allowing them to breathe as best you can. If you want 500 brake or maybe a little bit more, and that's still going to respond well, then maybe something around the size of a 17T is the turbo that you want to choose. If you want 600 brake or a bit more, and again, don't mind the car being a little bit lazier around town, you know, when the sort of sub 3, 4K rev range, then maybe the 19Ts are the ones you want to go for. Everything needs the supporting mods, so those are probably one of the more important bits that you need to factor in. Other than that, just have fun playing around with them. You know, these cars are immense. You know, they can be made ridiculously fast for not a lot of money. So, I mean, as I say, I'm trying to use one in Time Attack here in the UK. I'm developing it from a completely standard car, and this is the first major change that I've done to it. So it should fly. It's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully you'll come along on the journey with us. So hopefully you found that useful. As I say, these engines can be opened up to make some serious power if you know what you're doing, and hopefully this guide may have steered you to make some more informed choices when it comes to upgrading your car. If not, happy searching. Can't do much else. Basically, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and for more information on this build and general stuff about my 335. See you next time. Take it easy.